guys, today we're going to talk about congruent polygons. And so the first thing we need to know is what are congruent polygons. And the big thing to remember is that in math, anytime you see the word congruent, you know that you're talking about things that are basically the same or equal. So in the past, we've talked about similar figures where they are the same shape but not the same size. When we talk about congruent, we're talking about the same shape and the same size if we're talking about polygons. So basically what that means is if I have two figures like the quadrilaterals right here, if I have those and I can flip or turn or do something to one of them so that they lay exactly on top of each other, then those two polygons are congruent. And I can see that if I took the polygon on the right here and I flipped it over, that I could lay it on top of the other one. They are showing here with this notation that the side MP is congruent to the side YV, that those two side lengths are equal, and they are also showing that angle T and angle L are congruent, meaning that they have the same measurement. And so those would be the parts that would correspond to each other, and that helps me see that I need to flip that one over and how things would line up. So when we want to write that two figures are congruent to each other, we want to list the vertices in the order so that the corresponding vertices are in the same order. So if I called the first polygon there Y, V, T, R, okay, so I'm listing the vertices in any order I want, just start and go in order around. Then I'm going to say that that is congruent to, my symbol for congruent is an equal sign with a little squiggly thing over the top. And now I need to list my vertices for this second polygon so that they're in the same order that corresponds. So see how I have this pointy one that sticks up over here, that's Y. I would need to name M first because that would be the one that would correspond to it. Okay, and then I did V next. So I went down this side that's marked with the little tick mark. So I'm gonna need to go down this way. So I'm gonna name the P next. And then I'm gonna keep going in order, L, K. And so if I look, I had T listed third here. That was the angle that was marked. And I have L third, so I can see that I've done these all in the same order so that the corresponding vertices are matched up with each other. We can also make congruence statements when we know that two figures are congruent. Since I know that these two quadrilaterals are congruent to each other, that means all the side lengths are the same when I match up the corresponding sides, and all the corresponding angles will have the same measurement. So the corresponding sides and the corresponding angles will all be congruent to each other. And so I could name those congruence statements. So if I look, I could say that angle R is congruent to angle K. Okay, that would be one congruence statement. I could also say that this line segment YR is congruent to the line segment MK. So I'm matching up the parts, so that would be that line segment and that line segment, and I can see that those are the two that correspond to each other. And if I'm asked to make congruence statements, I could match up all the different corresponding sides and all the different corresponding angles. And I see that I've forgotten to put the line segment symbol there. When we have two triangles and we want to know whether or not they're congruent, or we want to show that two triangles are congruent, there's three ways that I can do that. I can show that if all three sides of a triangle are congruent, that proves that those two triangles are congruent, and we abbreviate that as SSS, so side, side, side. Meaning I don't need to know any of the angle measurements. If I know that all three sides of two triangles are congruent with each other, then those two triangles are congruent. And you can see that they've shown that here with the little tick marks on the side. If I have two sides with an angle in between them, it has to be the angle in between those two sides, and I know that those two sides are congruent and the angles in between them are congruent, that is another way of showing that two triangles are congruent. We call that side angle side, or SAS for short. Or if I know that two angles and the side in between those two angles are congruent, then those two triangles will be congruent. So I can see these two angles up top and the two angles on the bottom here, and the side in between them are congruent, then those two triangles are congruent, and we abbreviate that as ASA. So if I look down below here, keeping those three different ways that I can show that triangles are congruent in mind, I have two triangles right here, and I can see that this side, I can see that this side right here and this side right here are congruent. I can see that this angle right here and the angle right there are congruent. And I can see that the other side and this other side right here are congruent. And so that is two sides and the angle in between them, so that would be SAS. So I can show that those two triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. SAS. If I look at the two triangles on the right over here, they have marked that all three sides are congruent. So I have 3 tick marks here and 3 tick marks here, meaning those are congruent. 1 tick mark here and 1 tick mark here, meaning that those are congruent. And then the 2 tick marks at the bottom, meaning that those are congruent. And so by side, 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 I know that those two triangles are congruent. And once I know that two triangles are congruent, remember that tells me that all of the angles are congruent and all of the sides are congruent. So once I've shown that two triangles are congruent, then I know that all the other angles are congruent, and the other side. So here, even though I only was told side, angle, side, I now know that these other corresponding angles are congruent and this other side is congruent. Same thing over here. I know that the sides are congruent, but now that I've shown that the triangles are congruent, I also know that the angles are congruent. The answer to your free response question for today is trash can. And here are your free response and multiple choice questions. Have a great day.